Yo, what's going on guys? Havoc here, now I'm back. Today we're back at it again with the final episode of 17 Things Only OGs May Remember. A series full of old Clash nostalgia and things that you just had to be there to fully understand. And yes, you heard that right, this is the last episode. Honestly, I think I've discussed just about every OG thing out there, and the fact that we managed to reach 10 episodes is insane. So, to end things off with a bang, I've gathered 17 more things and compiled all of the other entries from the previous episodes. This is gonna be a long one. So, with that being said, let's get right into it.
Let's do this.
Okay, I've talked about how you need to rearm traps and defenses before, but does anyone remember the sounds they made? Like rearming a Inferno, X-Bow, Eagle Artillery, and all of your traps. Honestly, deep down, I wish we could still manually do this if we wanted to, just to hear those sounds once again. But yeah, the past is in the past. Troop builders. Yeah, in 2017, which by the way was 7 years ago, the builder suddenly disappeared as part of an anniversary event. But the cool part was that because the builder was gone, troops started to take its place, and every time they did so, they introduced some cool new stuff like spells or temporary troops. But not only that, the huts would change every time a new troop would take the builder's place, and seeing the huts change as well as the icons were really cool. Also, they actually did the work. You would see barbarians and giants upgrading stuff. It was really cool. Unfortunately for me, I missed the entire event, but I'm sure OGs remember this one. Base building websites. Oh man, this brings me back. Does anyone remember those crappy looking base designing websites that were popular? They were very popular before Village Edit mode, but they remained popular up until around the time they added base links. After the base links and being able to copy just about any base, those websites began to disappear, and nowadays it's pretty hard to find one. But man, was it really fun to build a base on one of those websites and share it with your friends. Locking a troop. Yes, once upon a time, it was possible of doing the opposite of unlocking a troop. A lot of players had a highest level barracks, a barracks that you upgraded higher than the rest. Now, of course, this wasn't a good idea, but people did it anyways. It was way more common back in the day. You may have had a barracks specifically for training one type of troop, like a P.E.K.K.A. With that being said, does anyone remember how much it sucked to upgrade that high level barracks and have any troop unlocked from that barracks inaccessible until the barracks was done? Fun times, eh? Fun times. This was changed in the October 2016 update when they combined all of the barracks into one linked system. The Super Queen strategy. Today we have Queen Charge and Queen Walk, but many years ago there was a third one called Super Queen. Basically, it was like a Queen Charge type of thing, but the Queen and healer part of it was the strategy. It wasn't a part of a bigger attack, it was the attack. And it was mostly used to farm Dark Elixir. It wasn't all that uncommon to see up to 8 healers and some troops that could help you funnel. It was crazy, but it was far cheaper than most armies, so you know, if it works, it works. However, in December 2015, the healers received a nerf that would reduce the effectiveness the more healers there were. So the Super Queen strategy kind of disappeared, and as time went on, Queen Charge would basically replace Super Queen. 2 stars win wars. Now, if you're an OG, surely the phrase sounds familiar at the very least, and I'm probably gonna unlock some memories you forgot you had. So, the phrase 2 stars win wars was a popular meme from 2015. What had happened was a YouTuber named Molt was making a video about clan wars, and at some point in the video he mentioned that 2 stars win wars. But as you know, that's not really the case. 2 stars do not win wars. However, in defense of Molt, the line was taken out of context and was blown out of proportion. The entire community went bananas over this one line, and believe me when I say that it wasn't just a few people. Oh no, you couldn't go anywhere Clash related without seeing or hearing or reading the meme. Anyways, please tell me I'm not the only one that remembers. Flower sounds. This one's pretty small, but surely someone remembers that the flowers used to have a unique sound effect. And this is how it sounds today. Shout out to this comment. After reading it, I went down a rabbit hole looking for these sounds, and I think he was referring to the mushroom instead of flower, but yeah, pretty cool thing to remember. When everyone used the same clan castle troops. Nowadays, with the amount of troops there are and the housing space in a clan castle, what is it, like at 60 now? I don't know. We have a wide range of options, and I almost never see anyone requesting the same thing in my clan, even for wars. However, if you go back far enough, maybe 2015 or before, you may find that almost every defensive clan castle request was the same. A popular one was a dragon and a couple of balloons, or 223, which was 2 witches, 2 wizards, and 3 archers. These requests were so common, and it's crazy how different it is today. Arl from the Revenge Clan. Does that ring a bell? How about if I just show you his base? This player's base exploded in popularity toward the end of 2015, and the reason is because he had a lot of odd features in his base, like extra buildings that he couldn't build, levels that were inaccessible at his town hall, no builders, he was in a clan despite having no clan castle, and obstacles that were actually from the goblin maps like this pool and the rocks. I remember the huge mystery around this base and people trying to crack the code. Is he a developer? Is he a hacker? What's going on? In the end, it turned out to be a result of a glitch from 2012, which had nothing to do with Arl. The base was eventually fixed, but I still remember the stories about this one. All of the wild theories that people had. The old poison spell. As you know, the poison spell has a cool animation with a dark laughing sound. Well, if you were playing when the spell was added, you may recall that that was never a thing. This is the original poison spell. The new visual and sound effects was actually a temporary effect added for Halloween 2015. However, once Halloween was over, the effect was made a permanent thing, and 9 years later, it is still like that. I mentioned this in a recent facts video, but I just knew I had to include it in one of these episodes. 0.5 town halls. It feels like it was just yesterday. 0.5 was a common base strategy that was basically like you upgrade to a new town hall but would not build or upgrade certain defenses. It was kind of like an in-between both town halls, hence the name 9.5 or 8.5, you get it. The reasoning behind this was to lower your war rate as much as possible and have a very strong offense, and it worked. A Town Hall 9.5 would be faced with a regular Town Hall 9, but would have the army strength of a Town Hall 10. This was very similar to engineered bases, however it was done differently, the method was just different. But due to matchmaking changes in 2015, the popularity of these bases started to die down. You might still find some of these floating around in wars, but they're rare. Metal hoarding. When Clan War Leagues were first introduced in 2018, there was no cooldown for the hammers. You could buy one and it would gray out, but then you could just use the hammer and purchase another one. This started a problem where players would save all of their medals until an update arrived, and because leaks were rampant at the time, players knew exactly when and what the update would include, so they'd save it for that day. Anyways, 7 months after hammers were added, they would put a cooldown on how often you can buy them. A little weird thing to remember, I guess, but yeah, that happened. Remember how annoying it was to know how much loot you had gathered from those goblin maps? Clicking on it didn't show you how much loot was available, so you had to go into the attack and check if there was still loot available. It was very annoying, and I'm so glad that you don't have to do that anymore. The White Flag Truce. I don't think many will remember this one, so I'll try and keep it short, but basically, if you were playing between August and September 2015 and were active on Reddit or the Supercell forums, there's a chance that you may remember a community-driven event called the White Flag event. And essentially, the goal of the event was to put your town hall outside with a white flag. In doing so, players would grab your town hall and nothing else, and in return get a free loot bonus. The event announcement itself was a huge thing, but unfortunately with millions and millions of players playing Clash, the results were very underwhelming. Still a pretty cool part of Clash history. When the Eagle Artillery did 3 times more damage to the Golem. Ah yes, what a classic. I think I mentioned the Tesla and Giant Bomb at some point, but some of you may recall the biggest Golem nerf of the century, or at least that's what we thought. When the Eagle Artillery was added to the game in December 2015, it seemed the developers were hoping it would reduce the effectiveness of single-stage Golem attacks, which were OP at the time. But it ended up not doing much, and as a result, the Eagle Artillery was given a favorite target: the Golem. And at the time, this was huge news. Everyone thought Golem armies were dead, but I've been a huge Golem fan since I unlocked it pretty much, and I can confidently say that 3x damage wasn't that big of a deal. The multiplier would ultimately be removed in June 2018. Dropping trophies can take a while, but if you were playing before 2016, you may recall a secret hack to lose trophies fast. Pretty much, it was just a glitch where you dropped a barbarian or any other troop and clicked next at the same time. You had to time it correctly, and if you did, you would basically be dropping a troop and losing trophies over and over very quick. This would result in losing tons of attacks without having to actually go through the process of attacking a base. It was very useful, but eventually it stopped working, or maybe it just got too difficult to the point where people stopped trying. And finally, to wrap up these 17 things, I wanted to show you some small visual changes that I still remember, like the health bar on the heroes. It used to be black. The guide arrows were green rather than orange. The collect bubble on the collectors was hilariously bigger than they are today. And here's a more recent one. Does anyone remember when magic items were a side scroll instead of up and down? These may seem insignificant, and they are, but it's just some small things that I remember that give me a bit of nostalgia. Okay, I thought I was crazy for a second when I remembered that at one point you could move a certain obstacle that you cannot today. The loot cart. The loot cart had already been a thing long before the shovel, but the shovel introduced some interesting interactions, like what can be moved or not. And originally you could not move the loot cart, but in the summer of 2019, that changed and you could finally move it. Why, you may ask? Well, I'm not entirely sure, but I believe it's because some players like to keep their loot cart around until it's at max capacity. You know, you don't want to claim it prematurely. But because the loot cart could spawn anywhere in the village back then, having it in one spot for days or weeks could be a problem when trying to redesign your base. So for about half of the year of 2019, you could freely move the loot cart wherever you wanted, but eventually they gave it its own area where it still spawns today, which eliminates the need to have to move it. This next one was a pretty long time ago, so grab your walker and tea for this one. Does anyone remember how useless the laboratory would be? When you started an upgrade, it would kinda just lock you out of it for however long the upgrade was. You better take a damn screenshot because for the next few days or weeks, you're not gonna be able to see squat. Fortunately, in early 2013, you could finally browse the lab during an upgrade. Revolutionary, right? Nowadays, finding a base with over 1 million of each resource is easy to find if you're in the correct league. Some people are out here finding 2 million of each. But I remember playing years ago, and let me tell you, the loot we're able to find nowadays is crazy. Finding 500k of each in 2014, you were like, hot diggity damn, what in tarnation? How the hell is that possible? I must be the luckiest player in the world. It's pretty funny looking back at it now, but of course, we didn't have upgrades costing 20 million or something gold, so it makes sense. Okay, this next one is gonna sound really dumb, but if you've been playing for a while, it might unlock some core memories for you. Remember losing your builders? As if you were looking for Waldo in the crowd? Yeah, it used to kind of annoy me, like where the hell is my builder? What building did I assign him to? I don't really remember. Sometimes it wasn't immediately obvious, and this was due to the lack of the builder summary screen. It just wasn't there. All that was there was an icon of the builder looking back at you, how many builders are being used, and a button that took you to buy more builders. That was it, and it was actually like this for a really long time. In March 2016, they added the builder summary feature, and ever since, it's been improving, and man, it's so convenient. You know, speaking of, builder suggestions didn't exist either. Do you remember how annoying it was to track how far you were into your progress? You had to look at every building individually, but the most annoying thing was never knowing what the max was for something that had multiple levels, like heroes. How the hell was I supposed to know level 40 is the max for level 10, you know? You just kept upgrading it until you couldn't anymore. That's how you found out. Or alternatively, you can go to Google and search it up. This is actually how progress bases became a thing because it was such a convenient method of looking at all of your levels much faster and easier, laid out right in front of you in a neat and tidy order. In May 2016, we finally got the builder suggestions, which quickly solved all of those issues, but it wouldn't be until early 2019 where you could see all of your available upgrades, even if you didn't have enough loot for it. Pretty small one here, but surely some remember that some traps originally cost Dark Elixir. When these two new air traps were added, the Air Bomb and the Seeking Air Mine, one was red and one was black. And this was during a time when Dark Elixir was a new resource, so it was pretty dang obvious that the Seeking Air Mine was the much more powerful and Dark Elixir version of the Air Bomb. And so it was speculated that we would be getting more Dark Elixir traps as time went on. In the shop, you had to buy these with Dark Elixir, and as you may recall from a previous episode, you had to buy them every time they were set off. So this was like a premium trap that you set in your base whenever you had the Dark Elixir for it. However, as the years went on, traps became more commonplace in the game. Supercell wanted people to actually use them and not dependent on when they can afford it. And so with the new rearm feature, it was decided to make them all cost gold, as it didn't make sense to have one trap cost Dark Elixir and the rest of them cost gold. Nowadays, it's pretty hard to get online and not be noticed. I mean, the clan can see you attack, your friends know you're online, and there's even an indicator above the chat showing how many people are online. So if the clan is active, you know it is. But surely some of you remember of a time when you could get online and there was absolutely no way for anyone to tell that you were online. You could be farming for 8 hours straight and no one would have a clue. In fact, all 50 members in the clan could have been active at the exact same time and no one would have noticed because there was no way to tell. The only way to let your presence be known was to say something in the chat, or sometimes you could visit someone and see if their barracks were training, just go full stalker mode, I guess. But it was never really concrete proof that someone was on. The point is, lurking was possible, but today, not so much. There are various ways to tell if someone is online, which is the reason some have been asking the developers for a way to appear offline. Can you believe it's already been 5 years since the first skin was introduced? I mean, goddamn, where is time going? Something I remember from those times was just how different the first version of the skin selection screen was. The first version of this UI was basically the skin situated on a brick or stone floor. I don't know. The background was a flag, but as you can see, there weren't many details it showed either. All you saw was the skin name. For its time, it was enough, but as more skins were added, it felt like you needed to scroll forever, and it quickly became outdated. About a year later, it was changed to this, where you simply tap the skin you wanted to view, and recently we got another refresh which looks even better, and man, it's come a long way. War ties, or draws, whatever you want to call it. The fact is, I don't think any clan likes to get a draw. I mean, the rewards aren't the same and it isn't a win, right? Well, thank God it's 2024 and not before 2016 because war ties were way more common and man were they annoying. The reason they were more common is pretty simple. There was no tiebreaker system in place yet. If both clans got the same amount of stars, it was a tie. There was no process after that accounted for any more variables. A tie was a tie. But yeah, that's basically it. There's not much to it. A war tiebreaker was implemented in September 2015, which looked at the total destruction from both clans, and to my knowledge, that's still how it works today. Nowadays, boosting just about anything will be 1 hour. Whether it's 4 times faster, 10 times, 24, the boost itself will last 1 hour. Of course, with the exception of resource collectors, they have their own thing going. This makes it really convenient to remember what these potions do, and it also keeps everything consistent, which is actually great. However, and you may have already figured, it hasn't always been like this. Before magic items were a thing, the only way to boost buildings was to click on the building and boost it with gems. But the amount of time always seemed to vary. For example, at one point you could boost the spell factory for 4 hours. This was back when spells took an eternity to brew, so it made sense. The barracks and heroes had options for 2 hours, then at some point 45-minute options. Eventually, as troops, spells, and hero training time got on par with each other, so did the gem boost options, and by the time magic items came out, 1 hour was like the standard acceptable time for a boost. Ah yes, the skeleton spell. It's been called the most useless spell throughout the years, and that's the internet's opinion, not mine. But as you may have noticed, it doesn't exactly spawn regular skeletons. It's more like those guards similar to the graveyard spell in the clan capital, and guards from Clash Royale, which is where the design originated from. But back when it was released in 2016, it did spawn regular skeletons, which was the point of the spell. But yeah, that's about it. I mean, it's easy to forget the spell was entirely different at one point, especially when it seems like it's not the most popular spell, especially back in the day. I'm surprised they didn't change the name to like Guard Spell or something. The old lightning spell. I'm sure you remember it used to require 2 housing space and it hit more than one place, but does anyone remember learning the pattern of where it hit? Honestly, I never cared enough to sit there and learn, but it was a thing. It definitely was. If you wanted to master the lightning spell, it felt like you had to take a crash course on where exactly it hit, why, when, what it can't hit, all that fun stuff. Honestly though, I prefer today's lightning spells for that exact reason. If you've been to Legends League before, you may know that if someone attacks you and gets 0 stars, you win 0 trophies, and in Legends League that's actually better than losing anything. So losing 0 trophies actually feels amazing. However, if you were in Legends League in 2019, you may recall that this was a little different. You could still lose trophies for successfully defending an attack. This is because the amount of trophies you win and lose in Legends League are based on the percent of the attack. But it also applied even at 0 stars. Fortunately for players in that league at the time, they ended up changing this before 2019 wrapped up, and I think it's one of the best things that they ever did to Legends League after the rework that went completely under the radar for most people. Nowadays, it's pretty easy to 3-star a Town Hall 10 and 11. It's almost a joke. But obviously when these were the max Town Halls, that wasn't the case, and it's not because new troops and spells, it's because the Inferno Tower was a whole different breed. Back in 2013, the Inferno Tower was given a massive buff that allowed it to negate all healing effects on troops that it was targeting. So basically, whatever it targeted, those troops could not heal. This single-handedly made those Town Halls way harder to attack. The Inferno was simply too powerful, and over the years with new levels, it was getting out of hand. Supercell didn't like the idea of these Town Halls being too difficult to 3-star, so they completely removed that ability in December 2017. And boy were the memes hilarious. They tried to buff it over the years, but it never came close to how powerful it was in those days. It's not often when a troop gets its housing space changed, and when it does, it can drastically change some strategies. Some may not care, but I found it very interesting to look at some troops, and it reminded me of some good times. And bad, I guess. Like the Wallbreaker went from 1 to 2, but also got smarter. That was a W. The Hog from 6 to 5. You may remember that from the time it became way too OP. The Miner from 5 to 6, and the Boulder probably had the most dramatic one from 8 to 6. There's probably a few I missed, but those are the most notable ones. Clan War Leagues are fun, and my clan rarely has a problem getting 30 people to participate. Sometimes we do 15, but it's good to have the option, right? Well, remember when Clan War League first came out? It sucked for big clans. The only option you had was 15v15, which, to be honest, never really made a whole lot of sense right out the gate. If all 50 members in your clan were trying to get some of those sweet-ass new hammers that had just dropped, you'd have to rotate 15 members 3 times throughout the week and still have 5 members unaccounted for. It was simply too small of a roster for big clans. I'm so glad we have the 30v30 option nowadays. Switching between siege machines, clan castles, and the warden's mode during an attack is so convenient. I mean, I feel like I'm never ready, so it comes in clutch when I start an attack without thinking, and I can still change stuff, you know? But once upon a time, that's not how it worked, and many of you may remember. When the Grand Warden came out, you had to change it at the village, and it remained this way for a very long time. It wouldn't be until siege machines was added where you could change those before dropping a troop, and then by the end of 2018, you could finally change both the Warden and siege machines at any point before deploying them. It may not seem like a big deal, but it has saved me so many times. When everyone had to war. Some of you may remember of a time when opting out of war was not an option. In fact, you had to war if you were in a clan. Once the leader hit that start war button, everyone and their mama was included. There was no way to not participate unless you left the clan and came back. It was like this when Clan Wars was first added in April 2014, and obviously this was a pretty major flaw in how it was originally designed, because not everyone is going to have the time nor want to war. This created a problem where players were getting kicked for not attacking or sucking at war, leaving them no option but to seek for a clan that didn't war. Fortunately, a little less than a year later, on February 24th, 2015, you could now opt in or out, and the leader could leave some members out of the war. At last, war wasn't some mandatory thing that you had to do. Hero regeneration. If you thought training times and spells took forever back then, you'll probably be surprised to hear that a level 30 king took 21 hours and 40 minutes to heal up in January 2013. Yeah, good old days, right? Maybe not so much now. Fuck that. Using your heroes 1 time a day, that's crazy. Luckily though, this was reduced drastically within the next few months. February 2013, a max level king's regeneration time was reduced to 3 hours and 54 minutes, and by May 2013, when they added level 40 heroes, it took exactly 3 hours. This just kept decreasing over the years more and more, and today, a max level 90 king regenerates in only 46 minutes. Just goes to show how times have truly changed. Game Center. This one's for the Apple users, because apparently it was way easier on Android for the longest time. Does anyone remember how annoying it was to log into your alt accounts years ago? I mean, it was unnecessarily tedious, and part of this was because there was no Supercell ID, but the rest of this was because Apple. Goddamn Apple. You had to hop into the phone settings, go to Game Center, log out, log into the other account, go back to Clash of Clans, and confirm the village you're trying to load into. They could have just added a switch account button in Game Center, but no! Life before Supercell ID was terrible if you had multiple accounts. And it's part of the reason why I stopped playing on my alts for years. But yeah, today is super simple, newer players have no idea. OG winter scenery. Okay, if you remember this one, you deserve a veteran's discount in the shop. Back in 2012 and 2013, there was a custom winter scenery, and one of the defining features was that the water was frozen. The shore was covered in snow, as well as some of the rocks, and there was glaciers in the water. It was really cool, and it's unfortunate that it only appeared for the game's first 2 years. I wish they had kept doing it every winter, or at least given us the option. And this was all before sceneries, so unless an update changed it for you, you were staring at the default one 365 days a year. You had no choice, and when changes like this came around, it was nice. It was a nice breath of fresh air. For the next several years, this winter scenery never appeared again. But fast forward to 2020, the default scenery was overhauled, and at the same time, they made a fall and winter variant. The winter one doesn't have that frozen lake anymore. In fact, it doesn't look anything at all like it. However, there are a few custom sceneries where it is frozen. Old shop UI. Does anyone remember the old shop button design? When you tapped on it, it brought you to this menu. The OG shop layout. Man, does that bring back so many memories. It pretty much stayed the same from 2012 all the way to 2018, so it was like this for a very long time, including the outdated assets. Like, I'm pretty sure Dark Elixir was never added to this picture right here. But other than nostalgia, I much prefer the new seamless UI, which was updated to accommodate the new League shop toward the end of 2018. Bigger magic item storage. When magic items were added in 2017, you could store a lot more than you can today. 10 books and 20 potions. That is a lot more than today's 1 book and 5 potion limit. Of course though, you have always been able to exceed it with real money. But if you were playing at the time, you might remember this was causing a bit of a problem in the game's economy. Max players were holding on to their magic items, and as quoted by community manager Darian, there were people with 25 to 50 books of buildings. And every time an update rolled around, they would immediately max out again and complain that there was not enough content in the game. I wonder why. Obviously, it was never intended for players to stash them all away like this, so by reducing the soft limit, players were more likely to use them. But man, those were some crazy times back then. Old app icons. You probably remember the game's icon looking like this for a pretty long time. Or maybe this one for the builder base. A lot of players came back for that one, right? And some of you OGs out there may even recall when the icon had a border around it from 2013 to 2014. This was a fairly common thing apps did back in the day to make it stand out in the home screen. But if we go back even further, serious, true OGs might remember these 2012 icons. This Christmas one being my favorite because they never did anything like that again, I don't know why. And the Barbarian one is slightly different from the one from later on. Here's a picture of all of them. Feels like a goddamn timeline of my childhood. I'm curious though, comment down below when you started playing. What era of icons or what year? The Champion League era. Once upon a time, reaching Champions League, the most badass league in the game, was a massive deal. If you hit Champions, you were officially a good player. You son of a bitch, you finally beat Clash of Clans. Now there's not really a reason why this was the case, it's more of a combination of a lot of things. Back then, matchmaking was much more different. Champions League was the highest league, the average player was around Town Hall 7 and 8, and progress was much slower. Nobody out here was dashing right to Town Hall 10 in a matter of a couple months, hell no. More like 3 years. So for a long time, it was a challenge for the average player to make it up there, and you had to be playing at the time to understand just how big of a deal reaching Champions League was. Nowadays, it's significantly easier. You still get 2,000 gems, which is awesome, but now that the average player is much higher than it was, being at Champions League is like chilling at Crystal 8 years ago. I guess the equivalent today would be more like reaching Legends League. Corner bases. Okay, this one's always kind of funny. Years ago, when people were still trying to figure out this whole Clash of Clans thing, you were very likely to see a lot of these bases. People putting the base in the corner with the walls only protecting one side because they assumed nothing could spawn in the outer edges. This was most likely caused by the fact that this genre of games was rather new when it came out. Before Clash of Clans, only backyard monsters existed. Over the years though, common knowledge about these games became more obvious and more available, and unless you're like Town Hall 4, people already know that that's not how it works. Old level 6 walls. Okay, I'm pretty sure no one today is gonna remember this one, but if you happen to be playing in July 2012 in the Canada soft launch, you might remember the level 6 walls looking like this. I'm so glad they changed it because if I had to look at that shit every day, I would have probably quit the game. My god, that is the ugliest shade of blue in a town hall that has no blue in it. On August 2012, for its global launch, the walls were updated to the more familiar design we know today. Thank god. Town Hall 8 flag. There's quite a few town halls with flags, Town Hall 9, 11, and 12, but some of you may remember the first town hall to ever have a flag. Town Hall 8. It had a different flag in front of it, and it was there since launch, presumably a way of showing it was the highest achievable town hall at the time. However, years went by and it remained there until December 2015 when it mysteriously disappeared just like that. No one knows why. But I'll forever remember Town Hall 8 having that damn flag that was different from the rest. Coming soon. No, I'm not talking about some movie coming soon to DVD and video. I'm talking about the Dark Elixir Barracks. I couldn't think of a good title, I don't know. When the Dark Elixir Barracks was added in early 2013, some of you may remember it had 10 slots, and the empty ones said, coming soon. Everybody was hyped. We're getting 10 of these? And yeah, every time we got a new troop, it was hype. Everyone was excited. When the training screen was reworked though, it no longer had these slots, but fun fact, if it was still like this today and we fill it in, the 10th slot would have been barely added recently. Yes, it took 10 years. But I don't know, this coming soon thing is very nostalgic. It reminds me of the early days when we could only imagine what was coming soon and we had no idea. Keeping limited time troops. It doesn't feel like that long ago when you could do this, but you'd be surprised that the last time you could was 5 years ago. Keeping troops you weren't supposed to have after the season felt very illegal for some reason, but it was cool as hell. I remember keeping Ice Wizards for 7 months and finally using them in the middle of summer. It was surreal. And people had been doing this since the first temporary thing, like this dude who kept the Santa Surprise from 2012. But in October 2018, this was no longer possible. After all, they were meant to be temporary, but most importantly, it was causing some complications with the game's coding. No clan castle sleep. Okay, this might sound ridiculous, but remember when you couldn't set your clan castle to sleep and sometimes you'd buy a shield to protect your war troops? Did anyone do that? You gotta understand, getting expensive troops in your clan castle wasn't as fast and cheap as it is today, so nobody was willing to do it over and over for one person. This ain't no fucking charity. Thank God, ever since June 2018, putting the clan castle to sleep was possible. But even more, nowadays it's not that big of a deal. Troops cost nothing and 1 gem donation exists, which is far easier and less of a hassle. Clan War Sandboxing. If you were really into the war scene in 2014 and 2015, you may be familiar with the term. It was a method of cheating in war where you started an attack against a base, put your phone in airplane mode, and do the attack without it ever counting. This allowed players to see the traps, clan castle troops, and practice as much as they wanted. This was possible because, much like multiplayer, the battle didn't actually start until you dropped a troop, so you could always leave if you didn't drop a troop. So by putting it in airplane mode, the game just assumed that you're not attacking. Luckily, around the spring of 2015, this was fixed. Now, when you entered a battle, you had to attack, and if you tried to cheat, it would count as a 0%. Rushing. Okay, you can still rush to some extent, but you need to build everything associated with the town hall. Long gone are the days of rushing right to the highest town hall in the game with like 90% of the buildings missing. It was fun. People made YouTube series with no walls, no defenses, all kinds of crazy random shit that was really entertaining. But yeah, it was around the Town Hall 12 update when you couldn't do this anymore. It had nothing to do with rushing, but more so with the war scene. Unfortunately, people were engineering bases to have the upper hand, which ruined the fun for everybody. Archer Tower rework. If you were playing in or before 2014, you might remember the Archer Tower being a little different than it is today. And I'm not referring to the visuals, I'm talking about mechanics. It was slower, like way slower. In December 2014, their damage was reduced by half, but their hit speed was doubled, so the damage per second was the exact same. This rework aimed to assist your base defending against spammy units like skeletons, lava pups, that kind of stuff. Let me know down below if you remember this one. I mean, if this change were to happen today, nobody would give a f. But back in the day, especially a building rework that hadn't really happened before was kind of a big deal. I don't know why, it's just like we cared more about stats or whatever. No village edit for war. Some of you may remember when Clan Wars first came out, there was no edit mode for your war base. In fact, your home village didn't have any slots either, so that meant that your current home village would be the one you took to war. The only way to change it was to change the base in the layout editor every single time you wanted to war. Obviously, this took a tremendous amount of time. Imagine changing your base like every other day. Some people like me would just have a hybrid base where you leave the town hall inside for war and then you simply put it outside for farming. That way you didn't have to constantly change the entire layout. It was certainly a struggle, a really annoying one, but thankfully it didn't take long for them to add war edit mode. Purchasing traps. In a previous episode, we talked about how you needed to rearm your traps. But if we take it back even further, you probably remember a time when every time a trap went off, it would disappear, and you needed to open the shop and purchase it again and place it down. Now, if that sounds really annoying, trust me, it was. This would lead to people not caring about placing them again if they were just farming, because you needed to do this every single time you got attacked and the traps were set off. And traps weren't even that powerful at the time for higher town halls anyways, so nobody cared. Traps were often ignored and put on the back burner during these times, which is probably why Supercell decided to make some drastic changes to them. Good times when nobody cared about traps. Language server myth. Okay, this one's a stupid one that I remember, and I'm sure a lot of you will. It brings back so many dumb memories. Does anyone remember when players were changing their game's language and believing they were finding better loot because of it? The rumor started because some players figured that when you change the language, the global chat changes. So if that changes, then the game must be switching servers. Except that wasn't the case, and it had zero effect on which base you found. People finding loot was all just placebo and believable coincidence. But damn, for about 2 years, nobody could agree who was right. It wasn't until 2015 when the rumors died down and everyone forgot about it. If you want to see funny arguments about this, just search this phrase on Google and you'll find tons of videos and Reddit posts. Town Hall snipe trolling. I mentioned this in episode 1, it was related to some other topic I was talking about, but I didn't really get to cover it and actually talk about it. It just recently popped up in my head. Because sniping was so prevalent in farming bases, sometimes you didn't want to give up your town hall that easily, so you'd fill the town hall up with every Tesla and trap you own in that goddamn base. And when someone came to get some easy trophies, they'd be met with the biggest troll ever. It wasn't particularly nice, but let's be honest, it was a little funny. People used to make compilations, and I think we all tried it at one point or were victim of the troll. Now obviously trap bases still exist, but this specific type of troll where the town hall was isolated with tons of traps is very much a thing of the past. OG war scenery. Much how the home village has gone through some changes over the years and the default scenery is not the same as it was, the default clan war scenery has gone through a number of changes as well, and I thought some OGs may remember some of the key differences if I show you some pictures. So first is the very first iteration. This was before Clan Wars launched to the public, and as you can see there are more fossil bones and there's like these dead bushes that I think look pretty sweet. Then on update day it looked like this. It had less fossils and the bushes were gone, and then finally how it is today. There's even less fossils, but the area has been expanded and has more detailed rocks and caverns and everything looks better. Face in the grass. I mentioned this in my iceberg video a while back. By the way, good video. Highly recommend it. And it's exactly what it sounds like with a little bit of a sinister twist. I'm not entirely sure when this blew up, probably 2015 around there, but I remember seeing everyone at one point talking about it. Players reported seeing a face in the grass, specifically a figure named Baphomet. Now, I'm not gonna go into detail in this video, but I remember vividly there was a back and forth on whether there was actually anything there, or if this was simply a case of mass pareidolia, a psychological phenomenon that causes people to see patterns in random objects. If you want, pause the video, have a good look at it, and let me know what you see in the comment section. Here's a very quick and small one. Does anyone remember when the language selection was more detailed and had flags attached to the language? It was kind of like the flag was the origin of the language, so even though Spanish is spoken by dozens and dozens of countries, the flag was Spain. I thought it was really cool and it was a really nice detail. Years later though, things like this just got lost in time, and today it's just a list of languages. I don't even think we would have it anyways because flags are removed from the game, so yeah. Gold grab. So gold grab is simply an achievement for stealing gold, and it keeps tracking up to 2 billion gold. And years ago, I'm talking around 2013 to 2016, players would look at your gold grab to determine if you were a gemmer or a farmer. And if you've been playing for a while, you know the community has always made fun of those who dump their entire paycheck into Clash of Clans. Because gemming was often associated with poor skills, like the whole idea was you can't buy skill, you know? Your gold grab was basically your credit score but for Clash of Clans. If it was too low, that means you gemmed or you're a noob. And if it was really high, that meant that you were a seasoned farmer and knew what you were doing. People would look at your gold grab to see if you were qualified for their clan and all this other stuff. Yeah, it was a little ridiculous. However, today, no one really pays much attention to it anymore. Many players have already reached the cap, so it doesn't track anymore. And there's so many other variables that affect progression, like the gold pass, magic items, and game economy changes, you know, all this other stuff. So yeah, really just a thing of the past. Off-limit grass. Nowadays, you can place decorations anywhere you want, but that wasn't always the case. Years ago, the outer edge of the map was off limits to anything except for naturally spawning obstacles, meaning you couldn't put your decor in it no matter what. On top of that, this area was also one tile smaller, so it was thinner all around. A few years ago though, out of nowhere, you could now use that area for obstacles along with other map related changes. Now, I was trying to figure out why the change, and it turns out there was a petition just a few months before that Supercell acknowledged, so we can thank the community for this one. But I remember the days when you had to put your decorations like on the buildable area. It was always kind of lame, I don't know. Healing buildings. The healers have gone through a lot of changes, and a lot is actually an understatement, I feel like. But I wanted to focus on one specific thing that she used to do way back in the day: healing buildings. If you had a healer in the clan castle and you got attacked, the healer could heal your buildings, essentially repairing them just how the builder does today at Town Hall 14. She was just 8 years too early. However, in September 2014, the healer's AI was given a major rework, and that included removing the ability to heal buildings. Interestingly though, over the years, there have been glitches that allowed her to heal buildings anyways. As far as I'm aware though, it hasn't happened in a while. Today, if she hits buildings with her heal, which has an area effect, buildings will now have a shield, much like storages have a shield when hit with a lightning. Yeah, pretty much the same. Slow progress. Progression today is very, very fast. You'd be surprised how quick someone can reach the higher town halls, like this user on Reddit who got to Town Hall 12 in just 1 year. And this post is 2 years old. But clearly, it hasn't always been like this, and I know a lot of you remember the days when getting to Town Hall 10 was an incredible journey that took like 2 or 3 years. It's crazy looking back at how long we were at these town halls, and players at Town Hall 9 today just sprint right through it like it's nothing. Like, what the hell? Obviously though, it needs to be this way. Imagine just starting to play the game and Town Hall 15 is like 8 years away. Hell nah. Random loot cart spawns. Here's another quick one. Does anyone remember when the loot cart would spawn in literally anywhere it wanted to? Kind of like how the gem box can spawn anywhere, that's exactly how the loot cart was, and it remained that way for years. Today, you may notice that it has its own area tucked away in the trees there. I actually prefer it there because I never have to look for it, you know? Free elixir from queuing. So back in the day, there was this method of getting free elixir every time you upgraded a troop. All you had to do was, when an upgrade was about to finish from the lab, with full camps, you'd queue that troop in your barracks, and after it's done upgrading, you remove them all from your barracks and get more resources back than before the upgrade. This is because the troops' cost would go up with every upgrade. But come on, Havoc. Troops cost elixir just a year ago. It's not that old. Can't be that old of a strategy, right? Well, this strategy was primarily popular in the old days for a specific reason. It's because the cost of training was significantly higher, so it was worth it to do it. Over the years though, troops got cheaper and no one really cared to do this anymore for such a small gain of elixir. So the whole idea of doing this was slowly forgot about. Okay, this next one has very little to do with the actual game, but a core memory that I think a lot of us have from back then. Remember the days when every video looked like this? The stretched look? Ah yes, nothing screams 2013 Clash of Clans videos more than this look. The reason for this is YouTube videos have an aspect ratio of 16:9, and at the time it was very uncommon for a phone to be that wide. So you'd have these massive black bars, and people uploading Clash would stretch the image to make it fit. I don't know about you, but whenever I see this, I think of old Clash videos. Sub 200 farming. This was an old farming strategy where you drop to under 200 trophies and farm there. Some used to call it the promised land because once you got there, you'd find more loot than you could ever imagine. It almost sounds like a myth, because it kind of is. See, by the time people were discussing it in 2014, it was already too late. Matchmaking had changed so much, it wasn't even worth it anymore. The golden years of sub 200 farming was 2012 and 2013. And people going down there after that were surprised to find your average dead base that wasn't even worth all that hype, unless you were in the lower town halls like below 8. Regardless, many players still kept going there up until like 2017, they'd swear by it. But the truth was that with all that hard work to get down there and stay down there, you could have just farmed elsewhere and find the same loot. Today, players still go down there to see what it's like or to see if the strategy still works, but it's definitely not a viable way of farming today. Here's another quick one. Remember when clans had no co-leaders and it was just leaders, elders, and members? Running a clan was very difficult without co-leaders because there was no other leader figure in the clan that could help you properly manage the clan. It was hard. You might think that codes were added very early on, like 2012, and surely no one is gonna remember a time without codes, but that's not the case. To give you an idea of how long we had to wait for codes, it was added just a couple months before the Clan Wars update. Yeah. Town Hall Rubble. Pretty much, Town Hall 10 used to have a special destroyed state. The infamous lava grill that a lot of us still have a memory of, but can't seem to figure out where it went. Well, Supercell ended up removing it a few years ago, and no one really knows why, but a lot of us still remember it anyways, because it was in the game since May 2013. It was always a thing. And then one day it kinda just disappeared. 2015 Barracks Rework. So we all know the old barracks screen. It went through some changes, but it was pretty much the same for years. And then we have our current one that's been almost the exact same since 2016. But wait a minute, I could have sworn there was another one that looked nothing like either of these. Well, you're probably remembering this very short-lived rework to the barracks screen. It was like this from June 2015 to October 2016, so you can see why it's easy to forget. It's the first iteration of combining all army buildings in one screen, but your barracks were still independent. None of the buildings were connected, so it was literally just a mix of the old system and the new system. I'm not even gonna lie, I don't even remember it being like this. But maybe it's just me. 2015 and 16 is all a blur. Trap text bubbles. We've talked about having to rearm traps before in the previous episode, but one thing you might remember from way back when is the text bubbles above a trap. It was exclamation points, and its purpose was to get your attention so that you can rearm it, and boy did it work. It was incredibly obvious and one of the first things you noticed when you logged on. However, this was a very short-lived feature. Traps got upgrades in November 2013 and displayed these text bubbles, but only a month later, they would replace these text bubbles with a smoke effect instead. They still have this smoke effect today, but it's not very common to see since your base does it by itself, but you still can see it visiting a base that's been offline for a while. But damn, I still remember those damn text bubbles that caught your eye right away. Old League format. Leagues in Clash have pretty much stayed the exact same since they were added in 2013. We've just gotten more since then, right? But if you were playing in the early days, you might have noticed that the leagues today are in a somewhat odd order. Like, the bigger number comes first every time. So if you're entering Champions League, you'll start at Champions 3. Why is that? Well, I don't know, but what I do know is that it wasn't always like this. Back then, the smaller number came first because it makes sense. So if you just got to Champions League, you would start at Champions 1. Not a change that anyone would care about, but definitely something players today might have not known. Less walls at certain town halls. It's not often that a town hall gets something new after being the same for years, and when it does, it's often a new defense or an army building. But sometimes, it's walls. Town Hall 7, 10, and 11 had 25 less walls than they do today. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the reasons behind these additions, only patch notes, but I think it's safe to assume that the town halls just needed more walls. I'm sure if you were playing at the time, you definitely remember, especially if you were at one of those town halls. Original gem box. Pretty small one here, but does anyone remember how the gem box gave a different amount of gems? This may be hard to remember because the gem box was glitched on arrival and pretty much no one could redeem it, but for those who did, you might remember that it wasn't 25 gems, it was 20. Yeah, they increased it because of the long wait. Hero Art Contest. In October 2015, a silhouette of a new hero was teased at ClashCon for the announcement of Town Hall 11. Now it's obviously the Grand Warden, right? However, that wasn't super obvious back then, and Supercell wasn't ready to reveal it, so they hosted a contest to see who could guess what it was. So for the next month and a half, the community came together to try and guess what this hero looked like. And if you were playing at the time, you definitely remember the vast amount of pictures, leaks, and discussions, and everything. It was wild. I can't remember who won the contest because the forums are shut down, but in December it was revealed to be the Grand Warden. OG clan game setup. Okay, this is a relatively insignificant change, but have you ever noticed how over time the clan games area has gotten smaller? Well, you're not crazy. They've slowly removed some things from that area, like the tent and the campfire that used to sit there. Today, those two things are missing and the fireworks are in its place. But mysteriously, even the fireworks are missing sometimes. It's unknown why they've been removing stuff from that area, but I believe this could be because when they added super troops, a tent appeared in that area, so why have two tents, you know? There could also be more reasons, I just don't know them. Very interesting stuff. More attack time. As you all know, you have 3 minutes to defeat a base after you drop a troop. However, for a brief period in Clash history, you had an extra 30 seconds. This change was done in December 2015 to allow more time for bigger attacks because Town Hall 11 had just come out and, it was bigger. Bigger town hall and you need more time to attack, right? Well, Supercell quickly reverted the change in March of 2016. So when I said brief, I meant very brief. For a little over 3 months, you had 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And I remember the change just like it was yesterday. Manual training. In a previous episode, we talked about how you had to train different troops in different barracks and try to be as efficient as possible. But one thing I thought of recently was how you had to look for these barracks. Before 2015, you best remember where your barracks was because there was no such thing as a train button. I've gotten so used to having it there, I could probably not go back to clicking on the barracks. It's probably one of the best time savers they've added to the game because not only do you have your barracks, you also have your entire army, so no need to click on the spell factory or any of that. Same wall rubble. Okay, I'm sure you've seen a destroyed wall before. You may not notice it a lot, but it's basically a pile of rubble with some hints of the color, right? So if the wall's blue, then the rubble will have hints of blue. Well, if you go back far enough, you'll notice that all wall rubble was the same. So a destroyed level 5 wall looked the exact same as a destroyed level 10 wall. Obviously, if I'm mentioning it today, that is no longer the case, and it's a bit different now. Every wall has its own wall rubble as far as I'm aware, but I still remember the days when they used one basic PNG for all of them. Smaller villages. Little fun fact that I think everyone knows by now, the village size has increased over time. It started at 38 by 38 tiles in 2012, then increased to 40 by 40 when the waterfall was removed, and then 44 by 44 in 2015 to accommodate the new Town Hall 11. Surely, some of you remember just how massive the size increase was in 2015. 4 extra tiles in every side is no small increase. Everyone noticed right away, and back then there were no sceneries. And as you all know, sceneries give the illusion of a bigger map. The map just feels incredibly bigger than it once did, and only OGs will remember just how cramped everything felt, especially playing on an iPhone 4. Wrecked visits. Okay, I had to verify this on Twitter because I thought I was crazy for a second. Does anyone remember visiting someone and if they were attacked, their buildings were rubble? When's the last time you've seen that happen? Yeah, it's been a minute, right? I can't remember the last time when it was last in the game, but this no longer happens. Visiting a base that got wrecked, you'll see all their buildings still intact. The only key indicator is depleted traps and dead defenses if they've been off long enough. I can't say I care about it, let's be honest, it's who cares, right? But it's certainly interesting how some things change and you only notice it a while later at like 3 a.m. Like, wait a minute, that's not how it used to be. Keeping the wizards from the tutorial. You used to be able to keep the wizards from the tutorial, but not long ago there was a sneaky change to it that not many people realized. If you try to keep them, they simply disappear as if you never saved them, which is pretty unfortunate as this used to be a beginner hack to an easy start into the game. It's not that big of a deal though, perhaps it was a glitch that was never meant to be there in the first place, and it's not like many will notice anyways because not everyone did it. It won't have any significant impact to the tutorial, but I think most will remember when this was a quick hack shared by many in the community. Play again button. Okay, this is a pretty small one, but does anyone remember just how basic and empty the end of a replay looked like? Just for comparison, this is how it looks today. Some things have come so far, and it's amazing to see how different it once was. I mean, this is a day and night difference. You literally had no information before, just a big old button in the middle. Healer air trap immunity. Yeah, I don't even know why they even bothered doing this. They made it so that the healers didn't trigger air traps in February of 2015, but they quickly reverted the change only a year later. Probably because Queen Walk was destroying the meta. The healer went through a lot of changes. No secrets. I don't really know what to call this one, but it sounds pretty corny. Whatever, anyways, does anyone remember when you could visit somebody and see everything? Traps, clank acid troops, everything? There was zero chill, all your business was out there. Obviously, Supercell started to make some changes when this became a problem, and they started with traps shortly after the game came out because the players in the leaderboards felt that traps should be a surprise. And yeah, that makes sense. However, you could still see someone's clan castle up until Clan Wars came out. That is when it became important. Spell cancellation penalty. If you thought waiting hours for your spells was bad enough, does anyone remember when you were penalized for canceling a spell? Much like buildings where canceling only gets you a percent of it back, the same thing applied to spells up until September of 2014, and I have no idea why that was ever a thing. It seems like back in the day, spells were a premium addition to your army, not something that you would have all the time. They cost gold, you had to wait hours, and you couldn't cancel, and if you did, you get 50% back. No wonder Barch was so popular. Anyways, yeah. Terrible times. Archer Tower redesigns. Alright, the Archer Tower has a complicated history with this design. It's gone through many changes since 2012. I mean, way too many to talk about. But there have been a couple times when the changes were far too obvious to not notice. Here is the original design. Then in 2013, some of the lower levels got more of that green banner. And then in 2018, Supercell really doubled down with that whole green banner thing and people hated it. Just 5 months later, they redesigned the redesign. And honestly, I think this looks the best. It's amazing how many times the Archer Tower went through a redesign before figuring itself out. The old winter music. The music in Clash of Clans has stayed pretty much the same except for new music that they've introduced for new features obviously, but the default home village music, like 95% of it is identical to the original. However, the same can't be said for the old winter theme they used to use from 2012 to 2013. It's unknown why they stopped using it, but I'm gonna play a bit of it and see if it sounds familiar to you. Bigger buildings. You're not crazy. Some buildings used to be bigger than they are today. For example, the lab used to be 4x4 and it is now 3x3. The army camp literally used to be bigger than a town hall. Now that's some crazy stuff. Today they're the same size, but it's funny thinking back to when these changes took place. People immediately went to Reddit asking why their lab was tiny. Funny looking back at it now. Ringus bases. Alright, Ringus bases still exist. They just aren't called Ringus bases anymore. Who the f uses that name? But let me explain briefly what that even is. Ringus was a collection of bases made by a guy named P. Bach in 2013. A lot of people thought the ring design was pretty unique because it would make troops go around the base and avoid the center because there was a ring of resource buildings, which made it very, very effective against Hog Riders, which at the time was one of the most OP strategies. No one was safe. Unless you were using Ringus. Anyways, Ringus would inspire a crap ton of other bases like this very popular one that everyone has probably seen. The community went bananas for these Ringus style bases. Over the years though, the bases lost their charm and became less effective, and the Hog Rider was just nerfed along the way. But there's still many bases today that follow the same principles. Players back then might have just referred to it as a Ringus style base. Automatic wars. Today we have the luxury of opting out or choosing who will be in the war, but it wasn't always like this. Clan wars used to be mandatory for everyone, whether you wanted to or not. F what you want to do, you're gonna war and you better attack. If the clan had 50 members and you search for a war, all 50 members will be in that war. It wasn't until about a year later after Clan Wars was added that you could choose your preference and leaders could select members. Crazy times. When we used to have 4 barracks. No, I'm just kidding, that was literally a few months ago. Selling decorations. When you were really broke and needed a little extra gold, selling decorations, even at a loss, came in clutch every single time. Like, not being able to train an army or hit next is another level of broke that many of us experienced. It's actually way better today though, thanks to free armies and the game having many ways to get loot fast. I just thought I'd mention that though because today you can't even sell them, you stash them. But it's one of those fond memories. The days when your name was permanent. Surely you remember first playing Clash and during the tutorial, you're asked to pick a name with a friendly reminder right at the bottom. Please pick a name you like because you won't be able to change it later. One of the hardest decisions ever, like whatever you type, that'll be your name forever.
Forever!
Now obviously, it didn't stay like that forever. In fact, you could change it like 2 years after the game came out. We all got bamboozled, but we had no idea Supercell was gonna make that change, so picking a name was a huge deal. The achievement button. For some reason, I always forget that there was always an achievement button, and I don't know why that's important. It's probably not, but it actually moved locations a couple times. It used to be in the top left in the clan mail's place, and the clan mail was at the bottom, and then it was moved just under the village edit mode. Things were getting a bit crowded though, so when they reworked the profiles, I believe that's when they got rid of the button altogether and just put the achievements in the profiles, because who wants easy access to their achievements? It's not like I'm out here finishing one of them every day, you know. It was probably for the best. Heroes before abilities. I'm sure a lot of you remember when the king and queen was added to the game, and something was different about them. They didn't have abilities. The king was pretty much a giant barbarian with a lot of HP and damage. And the same thing goes for the queen, just a big ass OP archer. Heroes didn't really feel like heroes until they were given abilities a year later, and you can only imagine how different that was for attacking. Not only did they spawn troops, but they regenerated some of their HP and dropped their own spell. It was crazy. Anyways, by the time the Grand Warden came out by 2015, this was already the standard for every hero after that. Toggle heroes. Remember when you could toggle your heroes to sleep? Did anyone actually use that when they logged off? I mean, I played with the button, it had a funny animation and sound, but I didn't actually log off with them sleeping. I wanted them to defend, and I guess this is part of the reason why this was removed. There weren't many scenarios where you'd want to save your heroes that bad when you were offline. I'm sure some players did, but to me, the heroes helped defend my base, so I never used it. But at least you can still do this with the clan castle today. Clown Wars. Supercell was back at it again in 2014 with a banger April Fool's joke. So before Clan Wars was officially announced, the community kind of had an idea that that's exactly what we were getting, but it wasn't 100% confirmed. So then Clash of Clans announced Clown Wars. At this point, everyone knew they were trolling, beating around the bush. You got us. Stop playing. Clan Wars was announced just a day later with this iconic commercial. I still have a vivid memory of that happening, and I'm sure it'll trigger some nostalgia for some people by mentioning it. Good times, right? Southern Teaser. Okay, these bases still exist, but they're a lot less popular. I don't think anyone uses these anymore. 2014 and 2015, everyone and their mama was using a Southern Teaser base. It was the hottest shit around, even the guys in the leaderboards, because it was OP as shit. It's called Southern Teaser because the average player would attack the southern part of the base because it seemed easier, when in reality it was a trap. There were way too many defenses in one place for your troops to survive, so if you attacked from the bottom, the most obvious choice, you'd most likely fail. And that's exactly what most players did. And going from the top wasn't all that easy either. Troops would walk around the walls to get to the defenses on the sides, or wall breakers didn't break enough walls, so it wouldn't work. This was before siege machines, so unless you mastered getting in from the top, this was a hard base to beat. Over time though, new strategies were developed, new troops came out, siege machines. Basically, it's pretty easy to beat one of these nowadays, and although the bases are still around, they're not as effective as they once were. Round Dark Elixir containers. I'm sure a lot of you OGs have noticed that the Dark Elixir in the shop looks a little different. Well, I mean, honestly, the entire shop looks different, but the Dark Elixir, they used to be in these round containers just like the Elixir, but at some point, and I have no idea when, they gave them their own squarish containers, which actually makes a whole lot more sense because elixir storages are round and the Dark Elixir storage is like a square. Damage multipliers. For a pretty long time, certain defenses did more damage to certain troops. This was probably done to balance attacks and counteract things that were too OP. So for example, giant bombs did 1.5 times more damage to hogs. Teslas did double damage to P.E.K.K.A.s. These were slowly removed over the years, and today, none of these apply. To be honest, I didn't even notice the changes despite using golems and P.E.K.K.A.s a lot. They did a pretty good job at balancing these troops and defenses after the fact. The Old Builder. There was something seriously wrong with the old design. Looks constipated or something. This design wasn't around for long though. By 2013, it already looked similar to how it does today, besides a few minor touch-ups. In other words, only 2012 players can relate. And I can't. I started playing it early 2013. What a nightmare though. Back when walls had names. Yeah, a lot of people may not remember or know, but when Supercell would release an update that included new walls, instead of just saying the level, they had a name. For example, Spikes of Pain or Flaming Magma. These days, a lot of the upgrades are simply introduced by their level, and as far as I've seen, this whole naming upgrade thing hasn't happened for a while. I don't know, I just thought of it one night, and it's the kind of shit that keeps me up at night. Attack timer. You know when you search for a base and there's a timer at the top that says battle starts in 30 seconds and then it starts to count down? Well, I think we all know that if you stay after the timer, nothing happens. You can still leave the match. It's not a big deal, you don't lose anything. But it wasn't always like this. That's my favorite line. Back then, if the timer ran out, you were forced to attack that base or surrender, which lost you trophies. Regardless if you dropped anything or not, it didn't matter. If the timer was up, then the battle started. It's pretty hardcore. Today, the timer feels more like a suggestion. You don't have to attack if the battle begins. It's only when you drop something. When buildings used to glow red, depending on which troop you had selected. You know, I thought this still happened, but maybe I'm crazy. Back in the day when you were attacking someone and you selected, let's say, a wall breaker, well, since the wall breaker attacks walls, the walls would glow red. If you had a giant, all defenses would glow red, and so on. This was a way to show what the troop attacked. Unfortunately, although cool, this was removed probably ages ago, so yeah, I don't know when though. Like I said, I thought this was still a thing, but I guess not. Honestly, I completely forgot about it until I just brought it up right now. Upgraded troops used to have no visual change. This one is probably the most OG thing I'll ever mention. Do any of you remember when upgrading a troop didn't change the skin at all? Yeah, when the game came out, troops didn't change when upgraded, so a level 1 barbarian would look exactly the same as a level 6 barbarian. Now, don't worry if you don't remember because it was only like this for an incredibly small time frame. The game came out in August 2nd of 2012, right? And upgraded differences was introduced on September 19th of 2012, so about a month later. If you were playing within that first month of the game's global launch, you may remember this and are a certified OG. More old sounds. This isn't anything in particular, but rather I decided to combine a lot of old sounds from back in the day that some of you may or may not remember. I think I did something similar to this in a previous episode as well, but now we have more sounds that some of you may remember. So the first one is the OG barracks training sounds. Then we have the wizard, and then the Valkyrie. Yeah, I miss those days. Being in a high league and getting tons of invites from global. Yo, for some reason, once I stepped into global, I felt like a god because people treated you like a god. If you were in Masters League or Champions League, you were automatically invited to every clan. It's so weird to think about now because it feels like everyone has at least reached champions, right? It's so like easy. I mean, of course, global isn't around either to experience this. So I guess all we can do is remember. Just remember those days when Masters League was like a big deal and everyone invited you in global. Staying online 24/7. I'm surprised we haven't talked about this one yet. Yes, in the early days of Clash of Clans, you could literally stay on 24/7 if you wanted to. In fact, that's exactly what many players did. But why though? Well, by staying online 24/7, you could push trophies and go higher and higher without having to go offline and lose trophies from being attacked. It was widely exploited until you couldn't do it. In May of 2013, this is when they introduced the personal break feature, so now you couldn't simply be on all the time. You had to forcibly get off, like the game would force you to get off. Pretty smart way to combat the issue. Decoration funneling. Did you know that back in the day, people used to use decorations as a funneling tactic? Yeah, me neither, but I'm sure some of you oldies will. So in the previous episode, I mentioned how you couldn't deploy anything on decorations. But people took this further and started to place decorations in specific areas where they didn't want the enemy to deploy anything. In doing so, the enemy would place troops in a specific area, and that area would either have a trap or would encourage the AI to walk a specific path. Like I said, I personally didn't know this, so I don't know too much about it, but a YouTuber by the name Simon Tay once did an explanation video on this. I think it was like in 2012. Speaking of Simon Tay, do you guys remember that guy? Man, one of the greatest OGs. When the king used to be 10,000 Dark Elixir and the queen 40,000 Dark Elixir. This was the hardest grind ever. I'm telling you. When you finally got to Town Hall 7, the king was 10,000 Dark Elixir and you also had no drill. But both the king and queen have since been cut in half. So the king is now 5,000 and the queen is 20k. It may not seem like such a huge cost reduction, but every upgrade is also cheaper than before, and today it's also easier to get Dark Elixir. I know it may not seem like such a prominent thing to mention, but trust me, this is very nostalgic. Getting these heroes back in the day was just such a grind, and I don't feel like it is nowadays. North 44, Quantum's Web, Bond B Canada, Mega Empire, King's Rock. Do these sound familiar to you OGs? Okay, fun fact, when I was in the leaderboards, oh my god Havoc, we know, you were in the leaderboards, not like you've said it 20 times by now. Okay, hang on now. Yes, I say it a lot, but we're talking about OG things here, and this happened way back. So anyways, like I was saying, I was actually in King's Throne for a few months, and then I graduated and joined King's Rock. Good times, good times. Very cool people, by the way. And I was also the youngest in there. I don't know, I was like 15. Anyways, these clans still exist, obviously, but at one point, no clan could take number one from these clans. These were the kings of the leaderboards and they held their positions for years. It really takes me back thinking of the old days. Man. When you had your level next to your name in the chat. Okay, this may not seem like such a significant thing to remember, but it's older than a lot of you think. So when the game came out, there were no leagues. If you watched the previous episodes, well, that may be pretty obvious. But in every picture you see, even if it's from like 2014, there's always a league badge next to your name. This is because leagues were added on April of 2013. Yeah, it's been 8 years since we've seen our levels displayed in the chat. Whoa, 8 years. God damn. Yeah, we're getting old. The old healer. There's been a lot of troop changes over the years, but in every episode, I like to take a look at least one of them. So when discussing this topic with Marika, a community manager of Clash of Clans, she let me in on some pretty funny stuff. So the first healer design was this one. You know, this is the OG one. This is the one that was the first one, okay? Then she was changed to this one, where Marika explained to me that people didn't like it very much because it looks like she hit a wall at high speed. I don't know why that's so funny. Then it changed to the one we all know today. Pretty cool journey, eh? When farming didn't exist. What do you hear when you think of farming? A lot of you OGs might remember of us putting the town hall outside. I mentioned this in a previous video, and that's not the point of this. The point of this is, did you know that when the game came out, nobody put their town hall outside? Like, farming like that didn't exist? Even though you could put your town hall outside and get a free shield, people didn't do that? Why? Well, it turns out that this form of farming didn't even exist until like November of 2012. When people made videos about farming in 2012, everyone's town hall was inside, and it's so weird. This is just one of those things that if you know what I'm talking about, you know. That time, you used to lose everything you had from higher players. You know how every time you upgrade your town hall, you cannot get the same amount of loot you used to from bases under you? Well, this wasn't always the case. At one point in time, if you were a Town Hall 6, being attacked by a max Town Hall 8, he could take the same amount of loot a player that was Town Hall 6 attacking you would also get. So it didn't matter how high the player attacking you was, they would all see the same loot available. Of course, this was fixed because it was just terrible, so yeah. Town Hall 10 only having one Inferno Tower. In a previous episode, we mentioned how Town Hall 9 upon release had one Expo. Well, do any of you remember when this was also true for the Inferno Tower? Yeah, when Town Hall 10 came out, you could only build one. Now, it wasn't a very long time though, it took about a month for them to add another. Still, it's incredibly weird thinking of a time when Town Hall 10 only had one Inferno Tower. iOS chat glitch. I remember I mentioned this in like a top glitches video, but basically there was a glitch with devices running on iOS at the time, and it would make the entire game crash. Now obviously this wasn't the game's fault, but I'm sure a lot of you can remember when this happened a very long time ago. Basically, this character would crash iOS devices. So of course, trolls would put this character in clan chats or clan mails. Like, why? Every time someone looked at the chat, the game would crash. It was a little ridiculous, but luckily Apple ended up fixing the issue, and yeah, everyone went home happy, I think. Attack ending after losing connection. You know how nowadays the game just kinda keeps doing its thing even if you lose connection? Well, it wasn't always like this. At one point when the game was still fairly new, if you closed the game or lost connection, the attack you were doing would immediately stop, and whatever percentage you had or whatever loot you had gotten, well, that's what you went home with. Obviously this was frustrating to some players because sometimes it wasn't their fault, so eventually the developers implemented a feature to keep your attack going even if you went offline. And it's a pretty helpful feature. Long Android wait times. Supercell usually tests their games in a manner of a soft launch in specific countries on iOS. When the game globally launches, you can usually download it on Android too. But that wasn't the case for Clash of Clans. This may be pretty obvious if you were trying to play at the time on your Android device, or you watch a lot of facts videos, but basically Clash of Clans went global but didn't have Android support yet. It was only about 14 months later when they finally announced the game would be coming to Android. Now I'm gonna be real with you guys, this one didn't really give me a whole lot of nostalgic feelings, but I wanted to include it anyways because I saw a lot of people commenting about this in a previous video, so yeah. The transition from iPhone 4 to iPhone 5. Every now and then screen sizes change, and the game also changes that size depending on the size of the screen. This is because the game has various sizes already built in. So when you get an Android or an iPhone or an iPad, the game won't have black bars around it. When Clash of Clans came out though, the iPhones that could support the game were all one size. So when the iPhone 5 finally came out, well, you had these hideous black bars around the game. If you were an OG and remember playing that early on, you may remember this. Good times, eh? How P.E.K.K.A.s used to spin as their attack animation. I'm not gonna lie, I had to search that up to help me remember. And then, it finally came to me. Right. When I started playing Clash of Clans, I do remember P.E.K.K.A spinning in their attack. But then I stopped playing, and when I returned in May of 2013, they no longer spun. But god, this one is super nostalgic. Yes, P.E.K.K.A.s used to spin in the middle of an attack as one of their attack animations. This was changed in March of 2013. This one though really brought back some long lost memories. When searching for a base, the troops were automatically selected, so when you missed the next button, you placed a troop and had to attack that base. Yeah, it sounds annoying, and it was the struggles back then. Jesus. For some reason, when looking for a base, a troop in your army was automatically selected for you. Like, why? This created problems with people accidentally dropping a troop when trying to tap next. So, naturally, people started treating the next button as a bomb that could detonate anytime. So everyone would carefully tap the next button and make sure that they weren't tapping near it. And if you had fat fingers, well, you better hope you have a big device, because my fat fingers on that iPhone 4 used to tap next and all of a sudden I'm attacking a random base. Those days when wizard towers used to shoot lightning bolts instead of a fireball. I actually don't remember this one, which is a huge surprise, but yeah. Maybe I didn't pay as much attention to the wizard shooting animation, but regardless, I did a bit of research and found out that yes, after the wizards got to level 4, their fireballs were more of a lightning type of shot. This also carried over to the wizard towers as long as the wizard on top was level 4 or higher. It probably isn't too noticeable, but today, level 4 wizards and higher don't have that lightning effect. Instead, they shoot more of a blue or purple beam that kind of looks like a fireball, but someone squished it together so it looks thinner. It's actually pretty cool to see the old wizard though. Once again, I had no idea, but I'm sure any OG out there may remember when this was once a thing. I don't know for sure when this was changed either because it's nowhere to be found in any patch notes. When there were storages on the roof of the clan castle, I didn't even notice it was gone until I saw this comment. Crazy, something had just vanished and I didn't even realize it. When treasuries were added to the game, the clan castles were given a slight redesign. In order to fit the new resources coming in now, they decided to add mini storages on top of every clan castle. I thought it looked pretty sweet, not gonna lie. But years later, this would eventually be removed. Now I couldn't find this anywhere in the patch notes, so I'm assuming they just removed it one update, assuming it was no big deal, and I mean, yeah, it's not a big deal. I believe the treasury was reworked at some point, and so they ended up removing these small storages altogether. When clicking find a match, they took your entire shield away without even attacking. This one was really frustrating, but then again, everyone got used to it. The golden rule was if you want to keep your shield, then don't look for a match, because you would lose it immediately even if you didn't attack anyone. There was also no shield guard, so there was no such thing as attacking someone but still keeping some sort of shield. No. I'm not exactly sure when this change took place, but I vividly remember avoiding to even click on the attack button. Today, it's pretty much impossible to accidentally lose your shield unless you attack someone or manually remove it. During the winter updates, snow actually used to be found on top of buildings, but it doesn't happen anymore. I believe I mentioned this one in one of my 25 things players hate episodes, but pretty much, it's exactly what it sounds like. When it used to snow in Clash of Clans, the buildings had an added effect of snow piling on top of them. So some defenses had snow on them, and your town hall was nearly covered in snow. Unfortunately, the winter of 2019 was the last time this would ever happen, because in the winter of 2020, when it came time to snow, there was none of it piling up. There was just the snow animation. It's unknown why this was removed, but it could have been so that older phones can keep up with the updates they have every year, and perhaps the snow piling up wasn't just worth keeping, so yeah, they got rid of it. When we could change the clan badge style when it leveled up. When clan levels were first added to the game in February of 2015, I remember a time where you could customize your clan badge according to what level you had reached, which was really awesome, like it was cool. So it's basically the same as we have today, but there was an extra option for customization. You could change the clan banner, which is pretty much what's behind the clan badge. Every time your clan leveled up, you would unlock more borders that you could use. Unfortunately, for some reason, this was removed in October of 2017 to simplify the system. After this update, you could no longer change your border. Instead, it would be done automatically for you every time you leveled up the clan. To be honest, I preferred the older system. It was cooler and more fun, but yeah, I guess everything comes to an end. When you didn't need to build everything to go up a town hall. When Town Hall 12 was released in June of 2018, it was made so that everyone had to purchase every building for that town hall before being able to go up to the next town hall. But before this was ever a thing, you could literally rush from town hall 1 to 11 without building any buildings. Of course, with the exception of the tutorial buildings. This is why sometimes you see a base that seems to be missing a lot of buildings. They either sold everything when it was possible in 2012, or they simply just didn't build any of it. This is also why series on YouTube like No Walls was popular, because it was possible and it was rather interesting. Like I said though, this was all changed when Town Hall 12 was released. when you could cancel an upgrade and keep 100% of the resources used. This was removed due to people hiding resources. The way you hide resources is by upgrading expensive buildings before going offline, so the enemy saw less to take. Then, after the defense, the player would cancel those upgrades and get all of his resources back. It was great while it lasted, but seeing that too many people abused the feature, the refund for canceling a building was reduced to 50%. So then, if you were to try to hide your resources, you would actually be at a loss once you canceled that upgrade. Turning the language to Norse to get into the best global chat. Yes, the days. So Norse is only a language setting in the game, but if you remember, when you change the game's language, it would also change the server of the global chat. It's hard to explain, and perhaps many people don't remember, but Norse was sort of known as the good global chat. Although it was a different language, most people there spoke English and were usually pretty high in trophies and very mature. It was used as a secret chat for high levels and people in the leaderboards. But it didn't last long. Word got out that you could find good players in this chat that weren't asking if any girls were online. Eventually, Norsk was invaded by cringy people, and yeah, it was ruined. When the heroes took 2 weeks for a level 4 king. Good old days when everything took 2 weeks to upgrade, even if you were at Town Hall 7. Town Hall 6 and 5, you weren't safe. Maybe at Town Hall 4 it was alright, but yeah. It was sad, but we were all used to it. Yes, the Barbarian King did take that long to upgrade even at low levels. For comparison, today, upgrading a king to level 4 takes 8 hours. 8 hours! That's insane! It's crazy how much the game has decreased the upgrade time so much for everything. Although I'll never get that time back that I spent waiting, it's good to see that people who getting into the game right now can start off pretty quickly. When you upgrade the heroes to a certain level, some of their gear would be golden, for example the King's Gamblet. Before the heroes in Clash of Clans were made into a 3D model in time to introduce skins, heroes were instead a 2D model. Well, obviously. But that wasn't the only thing different. They actually changed as you level them up. So when first unlocking the king, his armor was mostly a silver gray color. And as he got to level 10, then 20 and so on, he would have more gold and he would progressively change. The same way as troops change. But obviously when the heroes were made 3D, these changes would no longer occur. Instead, you would get a default skin that could only be changed by using a skin. Red gem packs and exclusive items. I thought I mentioned this one in a previous episode, but I guess I forgot. I don't know. I did mention it in one of my facts videos though. Pretty much over the years, Clash of Clans has partnered with Apple and Red in the fight for an AIDS-free generation. You could participate by buying the Red pack in the shop, and all proceeds would go toward the cause. In 2014, you would get a neat flag on your town hall for a limited time. And then the same thing would happen in 2015. Now in 2016, which seems to be the last year Clash of Clans ever did this, you've received an exclusive statue and a badge for the Barbarian King. Now unlike the flags that were only temporary for about a month and the King's Arm badge, the statue was permanent and you could keep it forever. The thought of this being that long ago is mind-blowing because it felt like these events happened recently, but yeah, no, the last time this happened was 5 years ago, when the Hog Rider's target was any and not defenses. In my facts video, I mentioned that when the Hog Riders was first released, it had no preferred target. And yeah, you can only imagine how weird that would have been. Hog Riders would literally just go for anything. That includes mines and pumps, barracks, defenses, anything. But of course, they would eventually be changed to prefer defenses first. And if a base has no more defenses left, the Hog Riders will go back to attacking anything in sight like they once used to. When the Barbarian King used to be a mobile rage unit for all barbarians and not just the ones he spawned. This one is pretty small depending on how you see it, but it still counts as one of those OG things. The King's ability today only affects the Barbarian the King spawns, but before the change in March of 2018, the King's ability also enraged any barbarians in the radius. meaning even if he didn't spawn them, as long as they were barbarians, they would also get the effect under his ability. Although I don't think they ever gave a reason for this. I believe this was to balance out the game a little bit more, but I could be wrong, so I don't know. When training troops in Night Village took time. I've left this one toward the end because the changes were made fairly recently, but not like a month ago. It was more like a year and some change ago. When Builder Hall was added in 2017, you had to wait for your troops to train, and you also had to wait for your battle machine to regenerate. Unfortunately though, the builder base isn't the same as the home village, and so players got impatient because they felt like all this waiting was unnecessary, and I have to agree. So in March of 2020, the training time and hero regeneration was removed altogether, and thank you, it's better this way. All the temporary troops like Ice Wizard, Party Wizard, El Primo, etc. I've left this one for last because these things still happen today, but it still felt very nostalgic to look back at all the temporary troops they've added into the game. From Clash Royale, we had the Ice Wizard, Battle Ram, Giant Skeleton, Skeleton Barrel, and the Royal Ghost. From Brawl Stars, we had El Primo. And then we had a few changes to existing troops like the Party Wizard and Pumpkin Barbarian. I actually remember keeping my Ice Wizards for about 7 months, although I wasn't really playing at the time, so I didn't mind holding it for that long, but it still felt very special. Troops being killed when army camps were destroyed in a defense. God, you have to be a serious OG to remember this one. This one is as old and nostalgic as it gets. So it's basically what it sounds like. If you had an army trained and went offline, and then you happened to get attacked, if the enemy destroyed the army camps, it also destroyed any troops that were in it. Oh god, I'm glad this was changed. You have to keep in mind training armies took hours, so imagine waiting 6 hours for your army only to go offline for 2 seconds and losing all your troops. I would have been so angry. Thank God this is no longer the case. When you had to go into every barracks individually to train an army, complicated than it is today. So basically, a level 1 jump spell only allowed troops with 4 housing space or less to jump. So for example, barbarians, archers, goblins, wizards, and you had to upgrade it to level 2 for it to allow bigger troops like giants and P.E.K.K.A.s. This was all changed in June of 2013, where the jump spell now worked on everything, and upgrading the spell would simply increase its duration. This is still how it works to this day. It wasn't necessarily bad. In fact, I kind of find that the previous version of the jump spell was actually pretty cool. It gave you a bigger reason to upgrade that spell. But it's nice that it's been changed to make things easier, and yeah. But man, the old days were weird and super nostalgic. P.E.K.K.A.s would be affected by spring traps in the first version of the game. Okay, this was super long ago. I couldn't even find gameplay. This is how old it is. I remember mentioning this in one of my facts videos and spending hours looking for any evidence, but I just couldn't. So I'm sorry, I can't show you the P.E.K.K.A. being flung across the map by a spring trap. It would have been cool, but I just can't find anything. But what we do know is that this actually used to be a thing, because in the patch notes for the first update, they were given immunity to spring traps. It's crazy to think that your powerful and expensive P.E.K.K.A.s would just fling to their death by a simple trap on the ground. Thank God this is one of the first things they changed in the game, because P.E.K.K.A.s would have been a little less useful if they were still affected by spring traps today. When clan castle troops couldn't jump over walls. I'm pretty sure this was in 2012 and they changed it in 2013, but basically, if you put your clan castle in a compartment like most bases do, the clan castle troops couldn't leave that area because they couldn't jump walls. It's weird to think about, because today they jump all over the place and luring them is part of most strategies, but back then you couldn't lure them. They would just sit in their place unless you made an open base design, which wasn't very good, but it did seem to help a little bit at the time. So maybe that's why those bases became popular, I don't know. When the level of troops was presented by stars instead of numbers. If you ever looked at old screenshots or videos, you've probably noticed the troop levels were purple stars. If you had a level 2 troop, it had 2 stars, and each level was another star. So in other words, if you had a lot of stars in a troop, you were about to demolish a base. This was later changed, I believe in 2015, to now show a little square with a number on it. I don't know which one I like better, but seeing those stars in old gameplay brings back a whole lot of memories. It is super nostalgic. The time you couldn't select a row of walls and had to do each individually. Okay. Apparently I forgot this was ever a thing in the last video, and that's because this was changed in March of 2013, so that's around the time I started playing, so it was easy to miss for me. Basically, before base links, before the edit tool, and even before building your base manually for hours, there was one thing even worse, as if it already wasn't bad enough. You had to move every wall one at a time. Yes, you could not select a row of walls to easily move a few of them. So when building a base manually, which was already complicated as we explained in the last video, you had to move your walls one by one. Imagine how annoying this was. Changing your base was literally like a 2-hour job. In October of 2013, they added the base edit tool, so if you had been playing since day one, building a base was the most annoying thing for about a year and 3 months. 4th mortar. When they added a 4th mortar from Town Hall 8 to 10, everyone was looking for an updated base. Okay, Clash of Clans has added more new buildings and defenses since then, but this time was the first major time. I could be wrong, but I believe Town Hall 8, 9, and 10 all had 3 mortars, and then Supercell announced they'd all get a 4th one. I'm pretty sure it was to balance everything out, but I also believe Symmetry played a role as well. We already had 4 air defenses, 4 wizard towers, 4 Teslas, 4 of a lot of buildings, and the mortar was left at, for some reason, 3. So it seemed logical to complete the pattern, right? I even remember uploading a lot of bases with a badge at the top of the thumbnail that said 4 mortars, because it was rather a new thing to experience at the time, so yeah, I knew I had to include this one. No loot bonuses. We've had loot bonuses for years. I think they were added in early 2013 along with leagues, but before that, there used to be no loot bonuses because there were no leagues. With no leagues, how are you going to calculate any bonuses, you know? I'm glad they added this league system though, because these bonuses be pretty sweet, eh? Now that we're on the topic of leagues though, I also wanted to mention the old league badges. It just brings back so many memories, and I remember the day they updated these. It felt so weird to get used to it, but they look pretty nice. When goblins came before giants in the barracks. This one is a rather small one, but I thought it was still worth a mention. If you played in the early days, surely you remember unlocking goblins before giants. But today, the giants are before the goblins in the barracks. And if you started a new account, you might have been confused. Like, why am I unlocking the giant first? Wasn't I supposed to get the goblins first? This is because they changed it to where you unlock giants first. When you attacked a player, it would show how long you activated the opponent's shield. Okay, this one isn't all too big of a deal, but like he said, it's a forgotten thing. Basically, when you attack someone and got enough percentage or just the town hall at one point, a message will pop up saying that you activated the opponent's shield for 12 or 16 hours. It's one of those things you probably don't even care about until somebody mentions that it was removed and you double check to make sure that it was, in fact, removed. Yeah, you can check for yourself and this pop-up never appears anymore. Like the commenter said, it is one of those forgotten things. Long times to find a match. Okay, we all know that the higher you go in trophies, the more you have to wait to find a base. Usually. And that is until you eventually hit Legends League. But did you know that back in the day, searching for a player was even slower? Whoa! So the way matchmaking works today is when you hit find a match, it'll start to queue up bases it will show you once you hit next. That way, you don't have to wait for the game to actually search for a base. Although it isn't perfect. The queuing system takes longer at higher trophies, and that's why you see this screen when you click next too fast, because the game can't keep up. Now, in 2012, there was no queuing for this system, so every time you hit next, you guessed it, the game would search for a base. This was a lot slower from today, and thank God. I'm a little bit of an impatient person. Naming yourself you to troll people. Okay, I think you can still name yourself you, but if you're trying to troll anyone, it's not gonna work, and this is because the chat has changed since when this troll was actually effective. They made one small change, and it's that the color of your name is now like, what is it? Green. Before, it was the same like beige or orange color as anyone else in the chat. But let me explain how this used to work before. Since everyone's name was the same color, you would name yourself you, and then the opponent would think that he was typing when in fact it was you. This is too complicated to explain. Later on though, they ended up making it so that your name appears green in the chats, so now you know it's you. The times the king and queen would be lured half across the map. These were bad times. Similar to luring out clan castles today, you could do the same thing with heroes. I mean, you can still do it, but not the same way. Like, they wouldn't walk across the whole map. They have to be in a specific range. Back then, if you were trying to lure a king in the far east position and you were in the far west position, then guess what? You could still lure him, because once he was activated, he would follow anything across the entire map. I definitely don't miss these days because it basically made heroes useless sometimes. One of the first things you did was lure the heroes and the clan castle troops and get it over with in like 10 seconds. That definitely wasn't a way to play. Today, it's a bit more complicated and it requires a lot of planning. This one is when you had to go to a goblin map and dump your troops right there because you couldn't remove the troops from your army camps or clan castle. Like, there was no option to remove anything. This one is truly an OG one. Copying bases. No, not this or this. I mean this. Yup. We went there. Over the years, Clash of Clans has made it easier to make and reorganize your base. First we got the village edit mode, then we got the ability to save more than one base, and then we could literally copy and paste bases using links. But before all that technology, you had to move your base manually. Every time you needed a new base, well, too bad. You're gonna sit here for an hour and do it. God, it took so long. I can't say I enjoyed those days, but damn, I feel old. Village edit mode wasn't introduced into the game until 14 months after launch, so you can imagine the struggle OG players went through just to have a different base setup. Dumb wall breakers. Okay, we've had a lot of issues with troops having a few loose screws, especially heroes, but do you remember the old wall breakers? I asked Twitter what was the most OG thing they remember from Clash of Clans, and Ryan from Supercell brought up something I had completely forgot about. The wall breakers were so dumb. So basically, wall breakers were designed to go after walls. I mean, they still do today, but they literally just went for any wall. Any wall in front of them was a target, even if it was just a lone wall. If you think this is bad, just wait until you hear that people actually made anti-wall breaker bases. Yes, bases with walls pointing out of it, so the wall breakers would target that and not the actual base. Luckily though, Supercell knew about this issue and they ended up reworking their AI in 2013. There was even a video uploaded by Clash of Clans explaining the new rework and how they worked. Man, to think this was 8 years ago is just crazy. Original Town Hall 11 designs. If you were playing in 2015, surely you remember seeing videos on the new flashy Town Hall 11, the biggest update in such a long time. But there was something different from those videos. The actual Town Hall and Eagle Artillery shooting animation were different. Why? Well, there's no major reason, it's just that what you were seeing in those update videos was an early version of what would eventually become something else. I think sneak peek started about a month or two before the update, so the Clash of Clans team had a lot of time to make adjustments. The two most notable changes being the Town Hall and Eagle Artillery. I can try and describe the changes, but instead, I think showing the Town Hall would be a lot better. I mean, just look at it. It's like a day and night change. Now, as for the Eagle Artillery, the design stayed the same for the most part, but the beams it shot were different. Originally, the defense shot up a yellow beam into the sky that dropped on enemy targets. However, this was changed to 3 consecutive shots of orange artillery shells. These changes may not be super obvious today, as Town Hall 11 was released a very long time ago, but it's truly something I still remember to this day. The first person to reach 4,000 trophies. Ask any player that's been playing for a while if George Yao rings a bell, and most certainly they'll know exactly who you're talking about. George Yao, currently a product manager at Space 8 Games, was the first person to reach 4,000 trophies in Clash of Clans. That may not seem like such a big deal, but back then, Town Hall 9 was the highest Town Hall, and there were no leagues in the game. It really was a big deal. Everyone was talking about him and everyone was amazed at the fact that someone had reached 4,000 trophies. Like, wow, how could you reach 4,000 trophies? That's insane. He basically became a Clash celebrity. There's more to this story I can go on and on about, like the problems he faced and how it affected his life, but the main point I wanted to get out there was that OG players 100% know who this guy was and when it all took place. The old times when you couldn't spectate or even see replays. In the old days, there was no such thing as seeing someone else attack or see how your base is defended. All you could do was attack. But what happened when you got attacked though? What did the players see? Just nothing? Well, we got a screen that said your base was under attack and you couldn't get back until the attacker was done. Luckily, over the years we got replays, but you still couldn't spectate live battles until 2014. And this year they added the features to spectate a live war attack, and then later on you could spectate your own base getting attacked. And thank God, because I was always impatient and anxious to see what was happening to my base. Let me in! The old air defense designs. You've probably heard a clanmate, someone on YouTube, or maybe even remember and said, "Remember the old air defenses?" Well, yeah, that's because in March of 2016, the air defenses were given a redesign in terms of their appearance. The old ones had more wood, they looked older and a little smaller, I believe, and the new ones were given more color, stronger appearance, and I think they were even slightly bigger. I don't think I can make this video without mentioning this one. But other than that, that is pretty much it. They just had a different appearance. And yeah. Constant Goblin Hero leaks. Oh my god. This one. Everyone and their mama was trying to guess what the next hero was before the Grand Warden. We only had the king and the queen, so everyone was speculating, well, what's something in the game that we'll probably get in the future in a hero version, and everyone was talking about the Goblin King. Now you might think I'm crazy, but if you're an OG player, you damn sure better remember those days when everywhere you went, YouTube, Reddit, Facebook, there was always something about a Goblin King leak or idea. And yeah, I'm sorry to break it to you, but there is no Goblin King. But I still had to mention this one. This one really brings back some good old memories. The OG tutorial. So the tutorial has gone through a lot of changes, but I wanted to specifically focus on 2012. The goblin maps you attacked were about the same setup, but not quite what it is today. It looked kinda off. The grass. Now I wasn't playing as early as that, so I can't remember if this was only for the sneak peek gameplay released 2 months before the game came out, or if it was like this at launch, but man, the graphics were so bad. Well, bad in today's standards, but of course, back then it was like super good. It was, wow, you can get those graphics on a mobile, you can do anything. But now that we're looking at this gameplay though, there's a few things different here, and the shop graphics, the buttons, the color shades, what happened to the builder? And look at the settings, you couldn't do anything but change volumes. Looking at this is like traveling to a weird Clash of Clans period. 2012 Clash of Clans was just something else, yet so simple and addictive. That's why I'm here today. Manual reloading traps. Back in the day, traps were just traps. They had no levels. They were just something you bought once and forgot about. But you had to take care of them. After getting attacked, if the enemy triggered traps, which they most likely did if you got completely wrecked, the traps were depleted. This is because you had to rearm them once you logged back on. In 2019 though, Supercell ended up removing the rearm option altogether, including the need to rearm Expos and Inferno Towers, and instead, after logging on, it would simply be done for you as long as you actually logged on. To this day, this is still how it works, but man, I'll forever remember the times of needing to log back on and rearm those damn traps. The ultimate revenge. Okay, times were different and the most valuable resource was Dark Elixir. It might still be, but back then it was glorified. Also, the lightning spell was OP. So what do you get? People dropping lightning spells on a player's Dark Elixir storage as a way to get back at them. This wasn't only a revenge thing though, no. It was a farming technique like any other. Brew some spells and go look for a base with a lot of Dark Elixir and simply drop it on the dark storage. I can't lie, I remember doing this. I had to get the Barbarian King at Town Hall 7 some way or another, and honestly everyone did. Obviously though, this is not possible today. These storages were given a shield to protect against spell damage. I'm actually happy Supercell did that because the strategy was just too easy and it almost felt like there was no real way to protect your loot. New chats appearing at the top instead of the bottom. This one's also a very small one, but someone sent this to me on Twitter and he said, I remember when new chats appeared at the top of the screen instead of the bottom. Yes, when you were in a clan and talking, the chats would appear at the top instead of the bottom. I have no idea why it was ever at the top. It made no sense, honestly, it never made sense. So when they switched it to the bottom, it was actually pretty cool. At last, you know, the chat finally makes sense. And yeah, again, this one's a pretty quick one and I just wanted to mention it because it's still an OG thing. Tapping on every collector. Okay, let me get this out of the way. Do you remember the old elixir sound? God, I'm remembering memories I didn't even know I had. Anyways, surely OG players remember logging on and tapping every single collector one at a time because that's what you needed to do. Besides being so nostalgic though, it was really satisfying. In 2017 though, things changed to make collecting your loot faster and more convenient. As you may have noticed today, you only need to tap on one of the collectors for it to collect the loot from all the collectors. Now, although yes, this is faster, I still miss the old days when you needed to tap on all of them. Something about that was just so special. The Old Grand Warden. Now this one isn't as old as the others, but yes, in the summer of 2019, the Grand Warden's appearance was changed. Now again, like I said before, it's probably easier just to show you and you can look at them and yeah, you can obviously tell the differences here. Now this one is a pretty small one and I just wanted to mention it really quick because it is really recent, so yeah. OG farming. I can't make a video about OG things without talking about how farming used to work back in the day. Now surely for you newer players watching, you've probably seen or heard someone talk about it, how farming used to be different and all magical and wow, it was better back in the day, you know. Well, it's kind of debatable on which system was better, before or now, but basically, farming was just different. Leaving your town hall outside of the base was actually a very common thing to do. This is because if you left it outside, someone looking for trophies would take your town hall and leave. And then your loot will be protected because you had a shield. Sometimes people even put traps around their town hall just to troll people. The good old days. Unfortunately, Supercell saw this system to be too easy and wanted to change how farming worked. And so fast forward today, leaving your town hall out isn't very smart because it won't give you a shield unless the attacker gets at least 30% of your base. And yeah, so leaving your town hall out after the Town Hall 11 update wouldn't grant you a shield as before and no longer protect your loot the same way. Watching a Chief Pat video to complete a single player map. This super nostalgic. Back then, if you had a hard time completing one of these maps and search how to do it on YouTube, the one person that would show up was Chief Pat. That's because he made a series on how to beat every single map in the game, and boy, I thought I was the only one, but apparently every OG I ask has at least watched a good old Chief Pat video to learn how to beat Sherbet Towers or Pekka's Playhouse. I remember coming from school, opening Clash of Clans and not knowing how to beat the damn thing. How the heck do I beat Sherbet Towers? I'm only like a Town Hall 7, how do you... What's this? Chief Pat always came in clutch though, and if you're seriously an OG, you probably followed one of his tutorials back in the day. The times before Dark Elixir. Now this is like before my time. I started playing Clash of Clans around May of 2013, so I think by then we already had Dark Elixir troops and heroes and all that. I can't speak by experience, but just imagine the days with no Dark Elixir. You had no dark troops, no heroes. Whoa, that's crazy to think about. I mean, most armies today include some sort of Dark Elixir integration. Whether it's your heroes or Hog Riders, a Golem, a Witch. Dark Elixir literally changed the game in many ways, and I just can't imagine how it was before. Being a Town Hall 9 with no Go Wipe, no Go Wee Wee, no heroes. Now you might be wondering what people use to attack. Well, most people in the leaderboards just use mass dragons. Sounds familiar? Yeah. Nowadays people just spam Electro Dragons and you're a pro! Congratulations! But anyways, other than that, for the casual player, Giants were the main meat shield, and of course, Barch was still around, and armies were very simple. If you play before the Dark Elixir times, you are a certified OG. Long training times. I'm sure you've heard me ramble about this before, but basically, training armies back then took hours. And spells, hours. Hero regeneration time, hours. Everything in the game took hours. Now clearly, after some years, these times have been reduced until we eventually got to training a golem in like what, 10-15 minutes I think? I don't even know. Everything is just so much quicker. You can train an entire army in like 20 minutes and yeah, you're good to go. But back then it was such a different time and everything took so long. Training something like Go Wipe or Lavalunian was literal hell. So guys, that wraps it up. 10 episodes, man. I don't expect many to still be watching to the very end of this video. It is quite long, but if you're still here, I just wanted to thank you for watching and everyone who commented their own OG things throughout the entire series. It's been a wild 3 years, and this was definitely one of my favorite series to work on. After all, I am a fiend for nostalgia, and digging through the internet for the weirdest and faint memories felt very fun. Clash of Clans has a rich history and it's full of forgotten memories, and that was the goal of the series, to go down memory lane and look for things that you may have forgotten. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed today's behemoth of a video, and as always, thanks for watching. Havoc Gaming out. Peace!